turn this over to Mike Harvey. And just 1 minute, and over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, and we welcome you to the second webinar in the series that we're promoting for career and technical education for students with disabilities. As was mentioned, this is a series that is hosted by Pennsylvania State University, the College of Education, and the Workforce Education and Development Program, working with NTACT and also working with ACTE. This is the second webinar in our series, and it does focus on effective partnerships between CTE and special education, communication, collaboration, and professional development. One of the things that I wanted to take a moment and talk about is in the first webinar series, we really set the stage for a framework for understanding. We used a legislative initiative and we crosswalked legislative agendas that are out there, specifically speaking about IDEA 2004 legislation for students with disabilities and the new Perkins V 2018 legislation dealing with career and technical education. The upstart of that conversation was really looking at CTE and students with disabilities and finding the Venn diagram, or finding the connection and the fit for students with disabilities in secondary career and technical education for concentrators, which is occupationally specific skills training. The need for benefit, the need for supports, and the need to follow and focus the IEP, moving students towards their transition goal was one of the major thrusts in that conversation, along with the new Perkins V legislation. All of which is to say, in setting the framework for understanding, we really need to work together to build a bridge that supports moving students from school to post-school activities and having them cross that bridge and move forward to be successful in their post-school outcomes as are delineated in their transition IEP goals. With that said, I want to move to the agenda. And the agenda really talks about, obviously, a welcome and a recap of the ground rules. We're delighted that you've joined us. Please make sure you use the chat, as was mentioned, for technical assistance, and then the Q&A to help us prompt the question and answer discussion period at the end. I'll take a moment to introduce the panel members and their topic areas for today. Basically, we have 4 wonderful speakers for this particular panel and this particular webinar series. We're delighted that they've joined us. Joanie Schmalzried is the Chief Program Officer for Anthony Wayne Services in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she will talk about the background and relationship between CTE and special education and really where we need to move forward to in professional practice in building that bridge, building that network. Additionally, we have Nikki Sprunger, who is the Director of Special Education Services at Fort Wayne Community Schools in Fort Wayne, Indiana, who's going to speak to the issues of the knowledge base of stakeholders concerning transition predictors, including career and technical education, work-based learning, and others, and the real need for professional development amongst the CTE and special education profession to help build that connection and build that bridge. From there, we move forward with Wendy Chalmers, who is the resource specialist at Sun Area Technical Institute in New Berlin, Pennsylvania. Wendy is going to talk with us about perspective and current practices in CTE in her setting here in Pennsylvania. She's also going to talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania Special Populations Organization, which is a division of the New and Related Services section in ACTE and works with students with disabilities. From there, last but not least, is Christy Barnett. Christy comes to us from Oklahoma, and she is the Disability Services Coordinator in the Great Plains Technology Center in Lawton, Oklahoma. She's going to talk with us about perspective and practices that are happening in her technology center for students with disabilities in Oklahoma, and also her perspective from ACTE Special Populations Group, which is part of the ACTE division of New and Related Services. From there, we kind of move into an open-ended Q&A, which really will cycle back or circle back, if you will, to taking a look at what does this all mean in real life, where we can ask and answer your questions from perspective in the field. That Q&A will be about a 30-minute time period, and from there we will do just wrap up and close out this second webinar. Again, thank you for joining us. We hope you find this informational. And remember, any question that goes unanswered isn't a good question. Any question that is asked and answered is a good question. So from there, I'm going to pass it to Joanie.
Good afternoon. So happy to be here. I am Joanie Smelshreed, like Mike said, and I am currently a Chief Program Officer for a foundation that supports inclusive community in Northeast Indiana. So we support education, training, employment, and independent living. Why I'm talking today about this is in my prior life, I served as a special education director, a secondary teacher, and worked with the state of Indiana on looking at practices, perceptions, lots of things that funneled into CTE programs and special education. Specifically, those experiences gave me a great understanding of the importance of the collaboration, the communication that takes place. My job today, you can move Michael to the next slide. My job today is kind of give you a little bit of the background historically. If we look historically, between 1998, 2011, there wasn't a lot or as much emphasis or urgency behind looking into CTE and special education. It was a great thing. It was a viable option for individuals with disabilities, but it was much less formalized. We hadn't hit the college and career readiness issues that we have today. Accountability was raised. Expectations have been raised. So just to take a second to look at what's happened in the past, several studies really identified what we know still today, which in some ways it's great, but in other ways it means we haven't quite attacked it yet. So the need for CTE and special education to plan together, the importance of interagency and interdisciplinary collaboration. Was there a disconnect that existed between when I left special education and went to a CTE program or building? And just also talking about how the two entities were communicating with each other. I think some of the latest, actually Dr. Harvey was involved in some of the latest study, we're really looking at how can we up the game, up the ante, what are the needs and instructional strategies to help individuals with disabilities be more successful in CTE programs. Michael, next slide, please. So the findings that I'm going to talk to you about today came from a study that came out in 2014 and basically looked at CTE centers in the state of Indiana. And it was a survey of special education teachers, career and tech education teachers, and guidance counselors looking at not just practices in communication and collaboration, but what was the perception that CTE and special education in some ways had of each other. So I'm going to talk about some of the key areas I think that were identified. The first one was, of course, communication. Everyone surveyed, everyone I talked to, you can all, I'm sure, relate out there, acknowledge how important it was for CTE teachers and special education teachers to communicate. And as you can imagine, the outcome was it happened when there was a problem or a concern or in inconsistent times. Time is a factor, knowing who to talk to is a factor, but everyone really acknowledged that practices need to improve in communication. Another one that I thought was interesting in the communication field was CTE teachers and special education teachers just feeling like they didn't have a good understanding about each other. And again, I can remember sitting at a table, case conferences, talking about CTE programs for students with disabilities without CTE at the table with us. So again, that need was identified, not just the perception, but the practice of understanding. Mike last webinar talked about completers, talked about how Perkins has changed and some of the regulations. We need to make sure that special education understands the parameters and the prerequisites of CTE programs. And in the same vein, that CTE teachers understand what students with individual education plans are bringing to the table. Next one, Michael, please. So one of the other big areas identified, and I kind of grouped this into three, was just that need for organized professional development. And this was across the board in surveys, agreeing the fact that career and tech ed teachers need to better understand not just disability categories, eligibility areas, what those potentially bring to the table, but understanding something even as basic as the difference between an accommodation and a modification, how to read an individual education plan, what that means when I, again, walk out of your building or walk out of your program at my typical high school and come to a career and tech education program. Didn't put it on here, but some places have the benefit of having a special populations coordinator, somebody identified, a special education teacher in the building. But honestly, more often than not, it was someone else in the building that had some knowledge. It was people coming in when they could to help share that information. So again, another area that was identified was just that some kind of ongoing professional development, continual onboarding for new teachers, CTE teachers coming on board. And I think the caveat of this was that without a doubt, when we surveyed, CTE teachers want to provide appropriate accommodations. They just really felt like they are often lacking in what that means and what that looks like. So again, it's not about not wanting students with disabilities, it's about better understanding. So the potential for those students to be successful is much greater than issues that might arise just because of lack of knowledge. Okay, next one. And another thing, and this I think is pretty important and really critical at this point in time, and that is just staff participation in planning. And I think even if I can't know as a special education teacher what all your CTE programs are about, it's really important to have somebody at the table who is representing what that looks like. More often than not, in the participants that I surveyed, where it was that CTE was not really involved in the decision making. Many CTE teachers got a list of students who were going to be enrolled in their programs, either the following semester, the following fall, sometimes that fall, but they really didn't have the chance to be at the table. And I think Mike talked about it last time, or one of the panelists, about the fact that we truly do have to look at whether or not we are making appropriate types of placements. And transition planning is all about my strengths, my preference, my interests, my needs. But sometimes it really is just like a good job match, making a good match for a student in a program that they have an interest in, that there's some potential success, or that there's the opportunity to teach skills. And that varies depending upon how your enrollment system flies. Do you have open enrollment? Is it a slot system? Do I get so many places in my program? But basically the thought around this was that if we can get everybody together at the same table, we can have much more intentional and meaningful conversations and not set students up for situations or programs that might either not be in their interest area, or they might not have the skill set that's needed to fully participate or even partially participate at their greatest level. So this was kind of the top down. Teach me about what you do. Let me sit at the table with you and talk about students, and then help me really, really understand what the needs are, how I can meet those needs in my classroom, how I can meet those needs in my program, and whatever else I might need to do to allow students with disabilities to more fully participate. Hey, Michael. And mine's kind of the shortest section because I'm just kind of giving you that overview, and everybody's going to tell you how to make this look. But bottom line of this is that for students with disabilities to have potential to be more successful and be more intentionally placed in programs, we have to have concerted efforts. What's that communication going to look like? When does the collaboration take place? What do we do with new teachers? How do we onboard people when they come into either side of the program? But there was no no wavering of all the people in the surveys that if those things were made available, everyone would feel like they were doing the best service to individuals with disabilities to provide them with the opportunity to be more successful. So that's it for me on just kind of the, you probably already knew this thing, but let's revisit it. So next up is Nikki Sprunger, and Nikki is going to talk more. Michael, was there a question that came up? Specific?
No, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay.
No questions have come in yet, so.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect, perfect.
So, Nikki.
Okay, thanks, Joanie. As she said, my name is Nikki Sprunger, and I am the Director of Special Education Services in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I'm going to speak today, next slide, please, about a study I did for my dissertation work in Indiana. And we really drilled down on the 16 evidence-based transition predictors based on doctor test research. We looked at the knowledge, the usage, the effectiveness, and the levels of agreement that professionals had concerning these predictors. We analyzed data from special education directors, assistant directors or coordinators, and special education teachers. Next slide, please. So what we found out, what we know, our knowledge base, is we do have work-study programs here in the state to help our students with disabilities develop skills. We know we want them to enter that competitive market. We do have interagency collaborations that are available to assist our students and our families. They're located throughout the states. And in some of our more rural areas, that agency has a much broader geographic area to cover. We do have occupation-specific instruction in all of our schools. We know that when we can get our students into that type of coursework, they will have greater transition outcomes. We also know that paid employment leads to successful employment after high school. And we also know that that CTE component is a strong predictor of post-secondary success. Next slide, please. So, but here's what we learned. Are we okay? So what we learned is our special education directors, coordinators, and our teachers, we know that our high school students are being served in a restrictive special education setting. Due to the education reform in Indiana and the high stakes testing, many of our students have to take what we call double dipping in algebra. They're taking Algebra 1 and a support class, English 9 and a support class in order to pass that high stakes testing, which in turns then doesn't allow them to take some of those electives we would like to see them in. The behavioral, the social, the communicative, and the functional skills are underemphasized. We need to work harder on our self-determination and self-monitoring goals. Those are some of those skills that are being missed. And also an interesting component by Wagner and Blackerby showed that students with disabilities, we know if we can get them enrolled in a minimum of 4 CTE classes, they have a greater success post-secondary for employment. The students should include, we should have experiences in real jobs. Many of our schools, especially in the rural areas, have work skills in the classroom, but they're not connecting them to a real job setting. And we know that that strong CTE program in secondary is key. They need to have experiences that look like work. That model that same work experience. Next slide, please. So there's many ways that we need to improve our practice in Indiana. Indiana has changed again, the diploma, the way to get diplomas in Indiana, and we now have pathways. The pathways do include more career technical education, so that's good for all students. We need to make sure we implement the team approach to transition planning. It can't just be the teacher checking boxes in the IEP. We need to make sure we're connecting to vocational rehab. In our area, ARC has a heavy presence, and there's also many community stores that will work with us. We need to make those connections to all. Joanie is another great community resource for us here in Allen County. So what are our resources and how can we connect with them? We need that collaboration with CTE programs. No matter, I've been in a large district and I've been in smaller districts, but making those connections and how can we work to help get our students into those programs. And the earlier, the better. We need to provide support to our students, our schools, and our families. We still have parents that don't understand what our CT programs are and the connection they have for our students after high school and getting our families engaged in those. We also need to look at the curriculum for our classes. So we need to move beyond that red box kit that we're using in our classrooms to teach students vocational skills. What can we do in our schools to start connecting those experiences to real life work? And then we just need to continue to develop and implement those ways to improve those transition opportunities, to keep working with our community partners, no matter how big of a partner they are or how small, and how we can help our students. And from here, I'm going to pass it off to Wendy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Chalmers. I'm a learning support teacher at Sun Area Technical Institute in New Berlin, which is, you can actually go to the next slide and I can share a little more. Michael, oh, there you go. Okay. Our school's located right in the center of the state. So just a little bit about my school before I continue on. We're a one-year tech school. So in Pennsylvania, there are a variety of different ways that technical programs can be introduced to students. And ours is fairly unique in that the students attend our school all day, every day for one full school year. We serve 5 sending districts, primarily in a rural area. So we have students from 3 different counties, 1 small city school, and all the rest are rural schools. So transportation is one of the barriers that many of our students face. And about 1/3 of our population, 30% of our population every year seems to be students with IEPs. And then of course the other special needs populations add to that. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but some of the reason that we think what we do really works is that our students are very successful. For such a small school in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, we send students to national skills competition. We always leave with a medal. We've sent students to host a competition. We have the majority of our students either in college or employment after they complete. And we have a very successful completion rate. And part of that, in the next couple slides, I'll explain how this has come to be that we have been so lucky in having our students prepared for post-secondary success or secondary success. And you can go on to the next slide. This is just an overview of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to have to talk kind of fast because I have a lot of things to share. But basically over the last, I've worked here for 17 years. I've been in career and tech ed for 18 years. And prior to my working at SunTech, the people that were here before us, the learning support teachers before me, started this program, but we've really sort of run with it. So there's a variety of things that we do to collaborate both with our sending districts, our career and tech teachers, and our agencies before students get to tech. When they choose to enroll, which would have been for this year, they would have enrolled in March of last year for this year. And then while they're here, So it's a real collaborative effort from both within the school and outside of the school. And these are some of the things I'm going to talk about in the next couple slides. You can go ahead. So before students, before we even get involved with the students, part of what we've done is worked really hard at collaborating with our districts and our community agencies. And there are two things that we have done that have been, I think, really instrumental in making this successful. In Pennsylvania, we have transition councils at each of our area intermediate units, which are sort of a funding source, a support system for the schools. We have become actively involved in our transition council, and we've been lucky enough to be in a very supported, committed community where the agencies, the sending district staff, all the stakeholders have been willing to come to the table. And we only meet 2 or 3 times a year, but it's a way that everybody can come together and share some resources. And it's usually made up of the transition coordinators, the LEAs, special ed directors, career and tech ed representatives. So usually the learning support teachers or directors at the career and tech centers, the health department, vocational rehabilitation, our one-stop career link, members of the community that are job coaching agencies, things like that. And then we also do, as part of the Transition Council, we hold a student transition conference every other year at a local university for high school age students, and all the students that have IEPs are able to sign up and attend that conference. And I'm not going to really talk about that, but if that is something people want to know about, feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to help you share a little bit about how we did that. The other thing we do is in each of our technical trade programs, they have to have an advisory committee. And as part of that advisory committee, it's usually made up of stakeholders. So if the auto technology program, and most of you probably know this, they have an advisory committee made up of college representatives, employers, a student, parent. We decided that in our resource room, our special ed department, that we also would have an advisory committee and meet on the same night that they meet or the same day that they meet. And this is made up of our transition coordinators at each of our 5 sending school districts, our special ed directors, our vocational rehab coordinators or youth counselors, our career link representatives, a transition consultant, job coaching representatives, anyone that we think would be a valuable piece of understanding how career and tech ed works and how we work with the sending districts. And we meet twice a year. We discuss our budget, professional development. We make some decisions about our program. But more importantly, what we talk about is some of the difficulties that either they're having at the sending district or things that they see would be beneficial to help students make good choices, or ways or things that are going on at our school that would be beneficial to them. And then this in turn has led to several different changes over the years, things that we've implemented or changed how we do things. So Michael, you can go to the next slide. Once a student enrolls at TAC, there's a few things that happen, but prior to that, before they enroll, we start our prep work in 9th grade with incoming students. So the majority of students that enroll at Sun Tech are seniors. And in beginning with those connections that we've made with our transition coordinators at the sending district, we work very closely with them to coordinate some activities that happen prior to them coming to Tech. And we've done this for about 25 years. We've revamped it a few times over the years when different emphasis came through with IEP changes and things like that. The new career pathways work has really helped with this. It's something that they are able to use as tangible pieces of paper. So a VIP tour is given to all 9th grade students that have IEPs. The sending districts call us, they say, hey, I've got 30 kids I want to bring over to your school to see your school. And we say, pick a day, they pick a day, they come for about 2 hours. They come with their learning support teacher, transition coordinator, or aides. So it's another way that they're getting in. We want those adults in the building because we know they have a big influence on students as well. And then we divide the kids into small groups of maybe 10 or 15 in a group, and the learning support teachers or paraeducators give the students a tour of the school. And it's program by program, sort of getting them to think a little bit about what is this? What does it involve? What kind of skills do I need to be able to do this? It's just an exposure. Sometimes we'll go into some programs, but mostly it's out in the hallway looking in. And then at the end, they come back to the cafeteria and they fill out an interest inventory, just a simple checklist. It's an informal inventory of what programs they liked, what programs they didn't like. We keep a copy of that. We give a copy to their sending district transition coordinators. And that is then used to help them with some further exploration. You know, you chose auto tech. Why did you choose auto tech? Why like cars? Well, did you like collision too? So we can start talking about these different things at the sending districts. They can start taking electives if their schools offer electives that are related and that kind of thing. And then in 10th or 11th grade, depending on the school, because we do have a couple schools that will send 11th graders as well, so they would come in 10th grade. They come up for what we call situational assessments. These are informal assessments, but it's where a student can come and spend a half day in 2 programs. This is, we have a visitation for all juniors that they can come up and spend 2 hours or I guess an hour and a half in 3 different programs. This is separate from all the regular ed students and other students that do that through guidance. This is more direct. Students participate in an activity. For instance, our auto technology instructor has, when we have a situational assessment student come up, they will do some work with another student. They will do a sort of a short reading assignment, technical reading assignment, and answer some questions. And then usually meet with the instructor and just talk a little bit about the program. The situational assessment is then completed by the career and tech teacher and given to us. We make a copy of it and keep it for our records, and we send a copy back to the sending district. This has been huge for multiple reasons. One reason is that the career and tech teachers, the instructors, feel like they have a say. It is very informal. We ask questions, and I think this is one of the resources that's included, and you're welcome to replicate it or do whatever you want with it. But the questions are sort of things like, what did you see as the student's strengths? What did you see as the student needs? And the reason that we did that is we found about 5 years ago, we weren't asking what the student's strengths were. And so we found sometimes teachers were writing very direct, like, he slept through class, I don't think he's interested. And while that's accurate, we would like to know also what are some things that you saw that were going well, if anything. And we made it a little bit less. We used to ask, I think about 15 years ago, we asked, do you think the student can be successful? And that really put everybody in kind of an awkward place. So now it's just, what do you think the student might need to work on or improve in order to be successful? And it gives some guidance to the sending district. And then we use that also when we write IEPs, which I'll get to in a minute. So you can go ahead to the next slide. We also attend, and I'll talk about transition clinics briefly twice, but we are invited. We have our transition council. One of the things that they do is they coordinate transition clinics at all of the, for not all students, but many of the students that have IEPs back at the home school in their sending districts when they're in maybe 10th or 11th grade. And this is a chance for agencies, transition coordinators, and me to attend and talk to the students about what their future plans are. So these are student-centered, student-driven meetings where they introduce themselves, they say who they are, what they want to do, where they're at, and then we sort of brainstorm, and different schools do it differently, but the idea is to brainstorm with the family and the student, the teacher, you know, what are the next steps? What do they need to do to get to their final goal? And sometimes students have those unrealistic goals. They want to be a veterinarian, and yet they can't pass a basic science class. So we need to talk about, okay, well, what are the stepping stones to get there, and how could we get there? What would be an elective that you could take? So while I go to represent CTCs, our CTC, I also share any ideas that I might have. And that's the nice thing about the clinics, is that we all bring different experiences and situations and connections. So sometimes it has nothing to do with career and tech ed, but I'm able to make a relationship with the student or the parent to give those some other ideas. But for the students that are interested in tech, it serves two purposes. One, I can share what the expectations of the program are. I often get a copy of the student's current IEP, or if I don't, I can say, hey, what kind of supports do you use? If the student says, well, I don't know, then we know, okay, well, we're not even at the place where we know how to ask for help. So we've got to get to that place. If the student says, oh, right now, they reduced my choices to 2 out of 4 choices on multiple choice tests, I can say, hey, we're preparing you for industry certifications. I'd really like you in the next year to really try not to have use that accommodation anymore, because when you get to tech, we're probably not going to use that. And it kind of provides some prep work ahead of time before they get to us to help them be successful. In some instances, we are invited to almost all the IEPs at the sending districts. However, there's only 2 learning support teachers at our school, and I can't go to every single IEP at every single district. So what we have asked our transition coordinators and our learning support teachers back at the sending districts to do is let us know if you have some of those red flag kids that are either looking at tech and their parents are adamant they're going to tech and they have a feeling the kid's not going to be successful, isn't ready, needs to learn some self-regulation skills, needs to behaviorally learn to do better, is choosing a class that's going to be really academic intensive and this kid's never done homework in his life. Or if we have a student who wants to come and the parent says, nope, my kid's going to go to college and he needs to stay here and take all the academic classes he can, and everybody else, including the kid, really wants to look at tech, I can go and say, hey, but you can go to college from tech and you can come up and get college credits. So for those types of students, I will make the effort to go down to the sending school district and attend the IEP meetings. And when they've asked, I have been able to bring a tech teacher with us in some instances when it's been necessary. It's not very many, but that having that relationship with that sending district has made that possible. Okay, go ahead, Michael. So I just kind of shared this, but the results of all of that prep work has been that students are more appropriately placed. We have less students going back to their district after they've stopped or after they've started coming here. We have a better relationship with our program instructors where they've already met the student 9 times out of 10, and they feel like they have some information to give, and we're taking what they give us and using that. And it's also helped improve relationships with the sending districts. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the next thing that we do, once students enroll at SunTech, we start getting enrollment numbers between March and May. May 1st is the deadline when students need to have their enrollment packets in. At that point, if there's vacancies, the other school districts can get some of their slots. Our enrollment process is handled at the sending districts. We don't have a big say on it. Most schools will look at academic progress, grades, and attendance, but every school district makes that decision on their own. But what we do is we write our own IEP. So there are 2 learning support teachers at our school, myself and Dirk Metzger, and we ask all the sending districts to send us their current IEP, their most recent re-eval or evaluation, any additional information, including present levels, their grades, anything that we might need. If there's other people we need to invite to an IEP meeting other than the parents that are on record, like children and youth, that kind of thing, let us know. And then we schedule the meetings here at Tech, and we start that at the very end of the school year in May, and we go into June, and we invite the career and tech instructor as the regular ed instructor. That person attends the meeting. And if it's during the school year, we invite the paraeducator that we have already at that point figured out who's going to be assigned to which program. And we do that because the paraeducator, in our opinion, is a very important connection to make. And then the LEA from the sending district attends. We have about a 95% attendance rate for parents and students attending those meetings at our school. So that means that some parents are driving half an hour to get to our school to attend these meetings, but we have an excellent turnaround rate for that, and it helps us make those connections.
When the question came in, roughly how many students do you work with for this process with each of the sending districts?
Okay, so this year is our highest number ever as far as overall enrollment. So our regular ed, our total population at our school is 326. We have 91 students with IEPs this year. And it ranges usually between 75 and 100 at the beginning of the school year.
Great, thank you.
You can go on to the next slide. So at that point, a student enrolls in our program, and our school starts in August, the middle of August. And we have, we're lucky. We are very, very fortunate. And I know this isn't true for everywhere, but we are lucky to have paraeducators. We have 7 paraeducators for 19 different classrooms, 18 different programs. We have 2 health programs. Each program has about between 18 and 24 students. And our paraeducators work between 2 or 3 of those programs. We usually try to keep the paras in the same program if we can each year. That's not always possible. We make those decisions based on the number of students with IEPs or special needs in each program, as well as their needs. So even though maybe there's only 4 kids in collision repair and there's 7 IEP students in masonry, but the 4 in collision repair have really significant needs. So that changes sort of how we assign our paraeducators. We very much value the feedback from the paraeducators. They take a lot of pride in their work and are given a lot of autonomy. They do come to us. Dirk and I kind of work with the student. We work with all of those students, and we know all of the students. We make sure the IEP is implemented, but we work very closely with the teachers, the instructors, to help them understand the IEP and understand what kind of supports and kind of brainstorm, because this is a different type of learning for a lot of these students, and we have to take them from where they were able to memorize and regurgitate information for a test on the Civil War and then forget about it, to where they need to actually learn it into long-term memory and keep it. So we work a lot with strategies with both the students, the paras, and the teachers. And then we also work real closely with the sending districts who know these students, whereas we probably don't know the students nearly as well as a lot of the sending districts. We keep real close contact with the learning support teachers and the transition coordinators at the sending districts to troubleshoot and problem solve through more concerning issues that arise usually at the start of the year. We provide training to our paras. All of our paras are members of the Pennsylvania Association of Career and Tech Ed Special Populations. We allow them to go to conferences throughout the year. We bring in trainings. We ask the paras, what kind of training would help you this year? I have two fairly new para educators this year that have asked for autism awareness training. So I have somebody coming in next week to do that. And then we sort of provide a lot of the supports to students. We do all the communication with parents. We do a lot of the problem solving, the troubleshooting, the higher need students. We work very closely with them. You can go on to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about transition clinics. While the student is enrolled here, if they've already had a transition clinic, we make a decision based on whether they're already hooked up with services for further support after high school and whether or not they need and will use that support. If they're already hooked up and enrolled, they're ready to go, then we don't have another transition clinic. Students that maybe weren't ready to take it seriously until all of a sudden it's their senior year and they're like, wow, I need to get my butt in gear. For those students, we certainly schedule transition clinics. Students that have complex home lives, students that are in the foster system and are going to age out, those kinds of things, we schedule a transition clinic. And as I said, these are student-centered clinics. So these are meetings held in a small room. We prep the student ahead of time. We say, hey, you know, we even give them a script if they need it, but you're going to introduce yourself. You're going to say what program you're in. You're going to say what your future goals are, what your dreams are, what you like to do in your free time, who you live with. Do you have your learner's permit? Do you have your driver's license? Things like that. And then the way that we run our transition clinics are the agency reps are invited, and there's a list of agency reps that we typically invite, I think, in the resources with this webinar. We come to the table, we schedule half hour for each student, a lunch break for our attendees, and then we continue in the afternoon. I take notes, I type up the notes. Everybody that attends is given some preliminary information about the student, provided we have the releases signed. If the parent's able to attend, great. We don't require them to be here as long as they sign off and say it's okay. And then we talk about their next steps. I take notes. I give that to everybody that has a role in helping them get to those next steps. So sometimes everything on the next steps is stuff they have to do with their parents. It's stuff that, you know, we can't help them with. Those notes go home to the parent with all the contact information. Other times, and more often than that, it's stuff that we can help them navigate, getting their birth certificate because they don't have a copy and therefore they can't get their learner's permit. Without their learner's permit, they can't go out and co-op and get a job. So we kind of walk through all of those scenarios and help the parents and the kids figure out what's going on. You can go on to the next slide. And so then the other pieces, we talk a lot about collaboration. One of the things that, at least in Pennsylvania, I found through the years is very true is that the different career and tech centers are very disconnected. The nearest career and tech centers around us are about 45 minutes to an hour away. And neither of the two that are near us do anything like what we do. They aren't the same delivery system. Many of them are half-day tech schools. Many have a focus on, they might be 3-year tech schools where they have kids coming in and going out all the time, so they don't have a big, what we call completers list. So one of the things that has really helped us is by being actively involved in ACTE Special Pops, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Career and Tech Ed Special Populations. It's made up of members from across the state who work with or are in some way connected with special ed, special populations in the CTCs or with the CTCs. So for instance, the transition coordinator at one of my sending districts is a member because she believes so strongly in CTE as being one of the stepping stones for a lot of her students to get where they need to go and further their towards their future plans. She's a member of that, and we have a conference yearly, we have newsletters, we have online resources, and similarly ACTE is a great, so that's that. Oh, those are just my resources. So that should all be in that, the link that you sent everyone, right?
Right, yeah, and just as a reminder to folks, if you go to the NTACT website, it's transitionta.org, and if you go under events, and it's actually what's new, and scroll down to today's date, September 19th, you'll see kind of a hold for this webinar, and then there's a zip file there. And when, before we jump on to Christy, there were a couple questions that came in that I just wanted to capture while you're still on. One of the questions is, with the VIP tour and situational assessments, this participant said that they feel like that's a great addition to the many tools that they utilize to collaborate with districts. One of the comments, however, that they envision hearing from a particular sending district is that the situational assessment could seem as counseling out special population students. Have you addressed that concern, and what's your strategy?
It has never been a concern. I think years ago, we occasionally had a career and tech teacher that would make a comment that was kind of not appropriate. I think the one time it was a comment about a student looked like he was stoned. And we were like, oh, can we rewrite this? Because that is shared with the student, because it's shared at the sending district, but we never use it as, we don't make a decision based on enrollment. So we don't have any say at the CTC whether or not a student is enrolled. That all happens at the sending districts. So that information has more often been used to say, hey, you know what, you need to brush up on your math skills. Or, hey, what happened? Like the one time I had a student that fell asleep during theory. And what I found out when I called the school to let them know, hey, this is a situational assessment review, he fell asleep. He said, you know what, he was just diagnosed with diabetes. Let's have him come and visit again when in the morning when he's awake and his medication is on track and stuff. So we've used it more to help support students and maybe be more aware before they come of what we need to be addressing. we have not ever had anybody use it as a, they probably used it as a weed out tool, but not in a bad way, sort of in a, hey, what happened and why do you think this happened? We do have students come 2 or 3 times sometimes until they figure out, what's going to work.
Great. Wendy, thank you. Appreciate that. And I think we can move on to Christy, and then we'll take some Q&A towards the end. That was a great presentation, Wendy. Thank you. Christy?
Hello, my name is Christy Barnett. I am the Disability Services Coordinator at Great Plains Technology Center in Lawton, Oklahoma. And at our Technology Center, we have 14 programs here. I have about 180 students that are on IEPs, and we have students with disabilities in every program that we have out here. But we do have one program, our Hospitality and Environmental Services program, that is geared specifically for students with disabilities. Also, you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry. Okay, so the big thing with our communication and collaboration is the ability to network. So it's getting out in the community, it's having our advisory committees with our stakeholders, which include our students and our parents, our industry. And so when we have our advisory meetings, then the industry people are stating that, hey, when they finish the program, then we want them to come and work for us as long as they're prepared. So that's one of the great things about having our advisory committee. One of a unique thing for Lawton is our transition program, which is geared toward our students that have, they don't graduate from high school, they get their diploma and they walk across the stage, but they go to the program until their 18 to 21-year-old program, so they get to stay till they're 22. And that gives them extra time out here at the Tech Center to work on getting the career that they're needing to go into, that they're going to be successful at. So we do make those communications with the community agencies. We have a lot of Native Americans in Southwest Oklahoma, so we are connected with our tribal voc rehab along with our DRS, vocational rehabilitation for Oklahoma. And then ICAP, which I'll get to in a moment. And for ACTE, we do have our Special POPs division for Oklahoma. So that also helps in keeping us in track and online as to how we can better prepare them for students with disabilities with career and technical education. Okay, the next slide. One of the main things that Oklahoma state law implemented this year was that all students had to have an individual career and academic plan. In addition to that, every time we have an IEP meeting, the students with disabilities also have to have an ICAP meeting at the same time they're having their IEP meeting to make sure where it's addressing the financial literacy, the post-secondary planning, academic progress, and the career exploration. And it helps develop that awareness and knowledge as, hey, what am I going to do when I get out of high school? Don't let the disability, define me. Let me show you what I'm capable of doing. And that is one of the great things about career and technical education. It's student driven. It starts in their freshman year. We have here on staff at the Tech Center, we will go and every student on campus will leave with an ICAP for ours, and then we share that with our sending schools. And so it is that networking and that collaboration to make sure everybody's ICAP is where it needs to be. The great thing about it, where it's intentionally letting the students think about, hey, what kind of job, what career am I wanting after I graduate high school? What am I going to do? It's very flexible, it's adaptable, it's, it's dynamic for them because it gets them to reflect on what am I good at, what am I not good at, what kind of job am I wanting to do? Then next slide. The career and college ready, the great thing about career tech, especially in Oklahoma, it is the best of both worlds. A couple of years ago, our marketing department decided that we were going to revamp everything that we do out here to make sure we get the right student in the right program at the right time. And that includes students with disabilities. And how are we going to go about doing that? So we met with Mark Perna, and he came out to our school, got us on track because our recruitment, we weren't having great retention rates for people, but after we did the Mark Perna program, the Tools for Schools, then our retention has just, it's been great for all the students and all parties involved because we're giving them the right training. Career tech education is the best of both worlds for students with disabilities because you have some of those that are going to be able to go to college and you have some of those that are not going to be able to go to college, but they can go and get that career. And so like with our project Lead the Way, those of our students that have disabilities that are going to be able to be college bound. And then on the others that are not necessarily thinking college is right for me right after high school, it gives them time to adjust, get out in the workforce, realize what they're great at, realize that career tech here at Great Plains, we have provided them with the training. We have given them the trades, the skill set that they need in order to be able to live on their own, have that independent living, and where we have made it all connect for them, where it works for them. So it is a teamwork approach. We work on the soft skills. We work on the employability skills that they need, the attendance, time management. One of the things we're dealing with right now are cell phones. Some of our programs allow cell phones, some of them don't allow cell phones. And so when you go into the workforce, some of your jobs, you're able to carry your cell phones. When you're in that trade and industry class, you're and out working, sometimes you're not allowed to have them. So that's been one of the battles we've been fighting this year. So it's just, career tech is just great. It's just the best of both worlds for everybody. Then the next slide. The great thing that we're doing out here is our internship program. And so with Goodyear, which is the big industry here in Lawton, we have students that in this one, what works for them, it's a paid internship. We have some internships that are not paid, some that are paid. And the students go and they get to do 2 days at Goodyear. They do 2 days here on campus, and then they're doing their online training. And so we had Goodyear was really good about it because these are our students that have graduated and are in that transition phase and didn't want to disclose to Goodyear that they had a disability. Well, he wasn't doing so hot in class, and finally Goodyear came and said, hey, is something going on? And he disclosed that he had a learning disability, had dyslexia, and then they worked with him and were able to get him certified, and to where they gave him extended time and were able to work with him more on what he was needing for their Goodyear certifications. So that's the great thing about internships, and it lets them know. Then we have our job shadowing, where we have a lot of students. Every student on campus does some form of job shadowing before they leave. Because back to the Mark Perna, where you did the trees, and he suggests you have your tree and all your leaves are where jobs that are in that field, the industry, or whatever program we're going into. And so some students don't want to be at the top of the tree. Some students want to be the leaves that are hanging off to build to get to the top of the tree. With the limbs. And so that's the great thing. It gives the students a visual. And so we start with the job shadowing for those that aren't really sure where they're wanting to go. And so that ICAP helps guide us as to what kind of job shadowing we're needing to set the student up with to get them to realize, hey, look at all the aspects that are in industry in each program. And then we go to the apprenticeship, where we have done that with our trades classes, where our students are getting their apprenticeship hours as their, because some of our instructors out here are contractors, so they're getting their apprenticeship hours toward then they can go and work on their journeymans. And so that's a good thing hour-wise, and we have that connection due to the networking that we've done with our advisory committees. Next slide. And then for ACTE, we have about 4,000 members in Oklahoma. For the Special POPs, we are aligned with ACTE. And for ACTE, Special POPs falls underneath New and Related Services. So for those of you that are listening, if you want to be involved and you want ACTE Special POPs division to have a voice of its own, then we have got to increase our membership. When I was president of the vice president of the Special POPs for ACTE a couple of years ago, we always fight that because we have a voice on the board through New and Related Services, However, we need our own voice for special pops, and we don't have that right. I mean, we have our voice, it just works with new and related, but we want our own voice at the table. And so in order to do that, we have to increase our membership to where we have 750 members. So if you are not a member of ACTE and would like to, make sure you check special pops on that. And so for also AOK, ACT, and ACTE, we are working with Perkins legislation for the non-trad, the out of workforce students. Mine is mainly with students with disabilities, but we deal with all that with students with disabilities, with the economically disadvantaged, the non-trad. And so it's getting involved, because once you get the involvement going on, you're getting that networking to where I have friends in New York, I have friends in Pennsylvania, I have friends in Texas, I have friends in Indiana that I can reach out to that, hey, what are you guys doing there, to where, what can I do better here in Oklahoma for our students with disabilities and what we're needing to do. And so all this is about networking and that collaboration, that communication to better our students. Next slide is just resources of what we use in Oklahoma. And that's my part.
Great. Thank you, Chrissy. Appreciate that. And thank you, panel. You did a wonderful job. Folks, we have about 20 minutes or so. And what we would like to do is make sure that we have an opportunity for folks to chime in and ask questions. So we will take the next 20 minutes or so for just Q&A. And so if you are interested and you would like, please post questions and post those to the chat box, and we will address those. I know at one point somebody was asking about the slot system and how that worked. And I think, Joanie, you may have addressed that, but I'm wondering if you could potentially just talk a little bit about the slot system again.
Sure. Basically, I guess it's just one way when you have a centralized CTE center and several feeding school districts. Oftentimes districts get so many seats, so to speak, in particular programs. So it's always been kind of an issue when, at least when I was a school administrator, on who's taking the seats, who gets the slot. So some places have open application, open enrollment, everyone can get in, but there are some CTE centers that are more limited in how many students can get in there. So when I talked about slot systems, I was talking about how do you look at completers versus potentially non-completers, more exploratory types of things when you only have so many seats available.
Great, thank you, Joanie. And I think, Wendy, you had a question because someone was asking that because you run a one-year program, when do your students get their academic skills in order to meet their graduation requirements? So the question was posed, do they get those along the way? Do they get them before they come to you? How are those academic skills met before they actually do a full year in your CTE setting?
All of our sending districts have handled a little bit differently, but most of the sending districts double up on some of the core courses. They do get, I believe it's 7 credits while they're here at TACT. The only academic class that we offer is a math class for students that are behind in a math credit or who choose to, they want to add a math class. But that's all handled back at the district in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. At one of our sending districts, they actually have an English class that they teach in their junior year. They double up on 2 English courses to have all their credits.
Okay, very good. I'm just looking to see if we have any other questions. I know that it will be important for participants to understand that each state runs a career and technical education a little bit differently. And while the mandate comes from Perkins and the new Perkins V, and there's a lot there that talks about supporting students with disabilities, the states basically design how CTE is run. And in Pennsylvania, as Wendy indicated, there are several different configurations between comprehensive CTC centers, which have both the academics and the career and technical programs under one roof. So students come for their high school time period. Wendy's program is a one-year program. There are other programs that offer half-day programs. So you would have traditionally students who are juniors and seniors who are coming for half a day for 1 year to get half of the program in the occupational skills specific area for completers, and then half a day the second year to get the second half of that skill set. There are a number of different ways that CTE is offered. High schools offer CTE programs as well as part of their curriculum. So I think it's important to understand how CTE is offered in your state, but more importantly, how CTE is offered in your region or in your school district. How does your school district participate in career and technical education? And then apply the principles of developing those effective partnerships and collaborative efforts and building those bridges accordingly.
There was a question that came in, is there a recommended grade or age to begin career tech ed exposure or coursework? And this is coming from someone at a career tech ed high school that enrolls only juniors and seniors.
Can I tell you what Oklahoma does?
Sure.
At Oklahoma, we address it in elementary school. We have our surrounding with our 13 sending schools. And so we will have where our elementary schools come in the spring. And then we do 6th and 7th grade. And then we have middle school camps in the summer that feed into our career tech programs. And then when they're juniors, seniors, and adults, they come out here to our tech center. That's how Oklahoma does it. So it's never too soon to start talking about career and technical education ever.
And one of the things I just want to piggyback on what Christy said, one of the things we do here in Indiana, we actually start that career exploration in preschool. There is a career component in our curriculum starting in those pre-K programs moving on up. So our students are constantly getting that preparation, getting that exposure, having speakers come in and going on those community outings. So they're aware of all the different careers there are.
Another question that came in is there a significant difference in how students with a learning disability diagnosis are viewed through the lens of career tech ed participation, opposed to those students that have a diagnosis of an intellectual disability? And then went on to talk about our statistics available that show any data for students with intellectual disabilities in their career tech ed. Somebody wants to jump in and answer that one.
Well, I think that that's a state-by-state issue. What happens in special education, as special educators know, is that you have your December 1st counts where in each grade level by each disability category, you're accounting for students that are being served in your LEA. The CTE programs have a similar accounting mechanism where we are looking at students who are in CTE, what grade level they're in. We also are looking at who is participating around the special populations terminology. And we talked about that a little bit. I talked about that in webinar number 1. The Perkins V legislation identifies 9 groups of, or 9 categories of individuals who would be identified as special populations. Students with an IEP, those with a disability, are one of those 9 groups. Christy talked a little bit about that as well. So typically what you'll find is that the Career and Tech Center will have some of that information. The State Department will have some of that information. I know that I've been working with national data sets on some of that information as well. The key with that is to identify our students exploring, meaning they're participating, or are they concentrators, which means that they are involved in an extensive occupational skills program. The short answer is check with state individuals on that information. The long answer is, depending on how your career and technical education center is set up, or your state governs how students get to career and technical education, answers whether which students are over or underrepresented by, disability type and also by program area in CTE. So the answer is a bit nebulous. It needs some work. Here in the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania, basically students are placed by the IEP team in general terms. And so students come based on the IEP team's recommendation to career and technical education. So it happens at the local level, working in conjunction with the CTE centers. In other states, there's not necessarily that kind of relationship or that kind of policy mandate. And so those slots may be competitive slots. Those slots may be allocated on a district by district number of seats in a particular program. So you really need to do the work on this at the local level to find out what's happening. And I know that's not the answer, but it does tie back to what we're doing here. And that is, it allows for building the network and providing communication to find that information out.
Mike, this is Dawn. May I add a little bit to your statement? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Dawn. You're good. Go ahead.
Oh, nice. So I'm almost positive that the definition of disability is different between IDEA and Perkins. So that's another thing to think about, and why the IEP team is so important, because how Perkins, I'm pretty sure their definition falls under the ADA,
Yes.
the Americans Disabilities Act, versus IDEA. IDEA has a much more narrow definition of disability than Perkins does. And so those are important considerations. The other thing is when planning for career technical education, you want to focus not on a student's disabilities, but on their abilities and their skills and their interests related to the career technical education. So it's really important that the IEP team really sits down and discusses what the student's strengths are, what their needs are, and really kind of does a discrepancy analysis to determine whether or not a CTE program of study is appropriate for them to help support them in getting their post-school goals, and then supporting them, again, regardless of disability label. So based on what a student's abilities are and what their interests are, moving forward to achieve positive post-school success. But yeah, the definitions are different. And so that's, again, why it's kind of nebulous, because it's very similar to when a student transitions from school age K-12 system of entitlement through IDEA to post-school systems, which are systems of eligibility where they define disability by ADA.
Those are very important points. I think the other thing to just note, and we did talk about this in the first webinar, is that career and technical education is offered to secondary students in the K-12 system. It also is offered in post-secondary environments and institutions of higher education, and it's also offered to adult ed learners. So that's why CTE typically uses the ADA and that as a framework for establishing individuals with disabilities. But at the secondary level, it is important to know that we follow IDEA, and that's the intersect between IDEA and career and technical education is at the secondary level, because those are students who are still in the K-12 system. But what Dawn said is absolutely right. The key with this is to make sure that there's a good fit, that the student with a disability will benefit, that the pathway towards post-school outcomes identified in the transition goals in the IEP align with the occupational skills training, and then find a way to work together to make that crossing of the bridge a successful outcome for the student.
A question came in, this is for the folks in Indiana. You had mentioned that you utilize a curriculum in your program. And the question was, what curriculum do you use? So somebody from Indiana?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In Fort Wayne, we did a massive curriculum revision last year, and we have written our own curriculum, pre-K through 12. So each one of those classes, whether it's algebra, geometry, or science classes, have a career component to it. We are also going to be reworking and writing our own curriculum for our 19 through 22-year-olds. And we do partner with ARC. They have a pre-ETS program, so we partner with them. We also partner with, we have Kroger stores here, so we partner with them for work skills. So much of our curriculum isn't something that we have bought, it's something that we have created ourselves and have developed.
Great, thank you.
To follow up with that question, because it is a curriculum specific to your area, do you have a system of collecting data to determine down the road the effects of that curriculum? Because I know there's lots of other states who are doing similar things, but are always questioning, okay, how do we evaluate, is this curriculum working for our students? So do y'all have that system in place?
Yes, we have an extensive data collection system. We have something called a learning management system. So everything is put on the LMS. We have interim assessment data that we collect and follow-up data to see what is working. We progress monitor our students on a regular basis. We also collect qualitative data from the students and the family as well as our employers. So that data system is extensive here in our schools, looking at both the quantitative side and the qualitative side.
Thank you.
A question came in for Wendy during your presentation, and it's actually a two-part question. Do you feel it's helpful to have separate tours for students that have IEPs? And then kind of along those lines, are there any negatives that you've seen from essentially doubling the population percentage of students with IEPs in your tech programs?
So the second part of that question, actually our 30% is our average in all of our sending districts as well. It's kind of maintained at 30%. It stayed the same for as long as I've been here, which is 17 years. So I don't see any difference there, good or bad. Our students know when they come to our school that the goal is to be a commuter. Our sending districts, I think because of all of the stuff that we do to collaborate and form a really good working relationship with all of our sending district staff, know that we're all on the same page with the same goal. It used to be years ago that it was us versus them. It was VOTEC sat way over here and the sending districts and academic world was way over on the other side. And it was, oh, we're going to send them to you and they're your students. We don't have that. We have this wonderful relationship where they're our students. So they're the sending district students and they're our students together. And I think that has helped with all the pieces of the things that I've talked about. So the second part of that question was about VIP tours. All 8th graders in all of our districts come up, regular ed, special ed, everything comes up as a whole school in 8th grade and does a tour through our entire school, very similar to our VIP tour, but in a huge group of students. So 160, 200 kids come up from each district and walk through our school every year. What we do then is in 9th grade, when they're starting to plan their future programs, their future classes, their goals, we bring up just the kids that have IEPs as part of the transition planning. So this VIP tour, first of all, it allows those kids that maybe otherwise wouldn't speak up, ask questions, maybe would kind of even avoid the trip sometimes because it's such a huge group of kids, to ask the questions that otherwise they might not ask. We kind of gear it towards them, but then also the informative, the assessment afterwards where they just write down what programs they're interested in, that then becomes part of the transition component of their IEP. So this is an activity that is planned. It's an activity that can go into their portfolio of transition activities starting in 9th grade. They do the VIP tour, then they do the situational assessment. So it becomes another document. So our school districts have been incredibly supportive in understanding not only the value of that, but it also satisfies some of their needs, their paperwork needs.
Great, thank you. And I think we may have time just for one final question. Mike, I don't know if you have any other closing comments. We have about 3 minutes left. So a final question that came in was about looking at students that have IEPs and being non-completers and looking at scheduling, and if there are any scheduling strategies to provide students with IEPs access to career tech ed, but not, quote, take the space or the seat of a completer. And I know that may vary from state to state and how that's even done.
Well, I can share a little bit about Pennsylvania in general. At my students are geared towards being completers, and our sending districts have created a lot of alternative programming. And our IU has a program to help students that aren't ready yet for the rigor or for the demands of the completer kind of purpose of CTC. So luckily they have work study programs, they have half-day programs, they have some community-based programs, they have a work foundations program where students get some of those soft skills, and sometimes they transition up to TAC after that. But I know that at other career and tech centers across the country, they do programs, usually in the larger tech centers have programs that are geared towards students with more significant technical needs or special needs that make it so that they're not ready yet to be the completer, or maybe they aren't ever going to be able to do it at that rate. I think because our school's a one-year school, it makes it really difficult to have that at our school. I also think because we're a very rural area, it's a little bit different. We don't have the same population and the same employability pieces. And so a lot of sending districts do that at their own schools and in other ways. But I know that across the state, there's several other tech that are much larger that do have special programs that are created just for students, that with the idea that they're not going to be a completer, but they are going to get some of the employability skills and maybe as a person instead of culinary arts, maybe in shipping and handling, and just handling, taking orders and doing the components of that. But again, you know, it's different at every tech school across the country.
Great, thanks, Wendy.
And Michael, you were correct. It does vary across states as well, and what state policies are doing. I know that we've posted work that basically speaks to ACTE and advanced CTE, and some states that are working towards looking at programming and options and access and equity issues. And so there are a number of resources that are posted on the NTACT site and also the ACTE site that speak to that. But know what's going on in your state, know what's going on in your local area.
Great, thanks. So as a reminder, folks, you will be receiving an email tomorrow. It'll contain this link, and we did put that in the chat also. Would love your feedback from today's webinar. Also, as a reminder, this is a series of webinars, and the next webinar is coming up on October the 16th. And the topic's going to be classroom supports, looking at universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. And then there are 2 additional webinars, one in November and December, to wrap up the series. As we mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar is being recorded. It'll be closed captioned and posted both to the ACT site as well as to the NTACT site. We would like to thank our presenters today for your time and effort in presenting your best effective practices in working in career tech ed and with students with disabilities. And Mike, I'm not sure, do you have any final comments that you'd like to share as we wrap up?
Just again, thank you very much for your participation. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch with us, and also look at those resources. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.